Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's IAP2 Learning Webinar, Prevent Truth Decay. My name's Amelia Shaw, and I'm the Executive Manager of IAP2 Canada and IAP2 USA. On behalf of IAP2 USA, IAP2 Canada, and IAP2 Australasia, I really want to welcome you to today's learning webinar. So we're going to get going really soon, and I'm going to introduce Sam and Devin. But before we do that, I'm just going to turn it over to Drew so he can do a little bit of housekeeping. Drew, over to you, please.
All right. Well, first of all, let's talk about microphones, because there is the opportunity for you to ask questions during this time and make comments. Please leave your microphones unmuted. We'll handle all the muting and unmuting from here. It just makes it a lot easier, but we will make sure that everybody's mics are muted. That way we don't get feedback down the line. This is being recorded. It's one of the member benefits that we provide to those who are part of IAP2, is they can get a hold of the recording afterwards. For a lot of people, especially in Australasia, the Australasian affiliate, they register for the webinar and then they get the recording because it's like really early in the morning in Australia and New Zealand right now. But regardless, this is something that members can get out of this. So you'll be getting that. We'll send you the link to the recording. We'll also send around any collateral materials that Sam and Devin might have, that might make reference to, and also the slide deck. We'll send that around in a PDF format so that you've got that to refer to as well. So one more thing is we've got a survey that we send out afterwards, just getting an idea of what you liked about this, some things that could have been improved. Did you feel your questions were answered properly? That sort of thing helps us to keep on improving the webinars as well. And so with that, I'll hand this off to Amelia and we'll get this thing started.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much, Drew. And yes, this is our very first Victoria Encore. And what is a Victoria Encore? Basically, it's we had lots of very successful sessions at our IAP2 North American Conference in Victoria in September. And during those sessions, we asked people to identify ones that they felt would make great webinars, because sometimes it can be a great session, but it might not translate into being a good webinar. So this is our first one, and it's with real pleasure that I get to welcome Sam Imperati and Devin Howington. So Sam is a stand-up comedy winner who's also being named to the prestigious list of best lawyers in America for alternative dispute resolution. He earned his BA in Humanities from the University of Santa Clara and his JD from King Hall at University of California at Davis. He's passionate about fairness, solving problems, and respect. Sam is a mediator, facilitator, trainer, teacher, author, and lawyer. He plays in an over-60s soccer league where movement is occasionally perceptible and makes a mean Italian ragu spaghetti sauce. So welcome, Sam. And while I'm introducing Sam, Drew, if you could please give Sam the screen so he can take on with the presentation, that would be great. So Devin Howington, PhD. Devin has her MS in Conflict Resolution and PhD in Social Psychology, both from the University of Oregon. She is interested in how people come to understand one another and what that understanding means for achieving better outcomes. Devin is a trained mediator with experience in custody and small claims. Devin stays entertained by her 2 cats and enjoys cooking for all of her friends, but she has yet to taste Sam's famous ragu. So with that, it's my real pleasure to welcome both Sam and Devin to the IAP2 Learning Webinar. And it's over to you. So I hope everyone enjoys this. And just again, a quick reminder, this is meant to be an interactive webinar. So if you've got any questions, if you've got any comments, either raise your hand or please send us something in the question box. And I'll make sure that I bring it to Sam and Devin's attention. Sam and Devin, how are you doing? Sam, I think that you may have your mute on. So we're just checking to make sure that you take off your mute. All right. Drew, can you do me a favor? Because we were hearing Sam and Devin just fine a few minutes ago.
And
can you just double check with Sam?
There
we go. Sam?
It's great to be alive. Sorry for that technical. We are, in fact, alive from Portland, Oregon, USA. And thank you for having us. We really enjoyed our trip to Victoria, and we looked at it as kind of a cross-disciplinary process. We are public policy facilitators and mediators. And we also do litigation, mediation, and training. And we're just delighted to be here and hope not to cause too many international incidents on the way. So Devin is going to kick us off. Truth, Decay, what is our role? And away she goes.
Great. So the inspiration for this presentation was a paper, basically a book by the RAND Corporation, a think tank here in the United States, that was all about this concept of truth decay, which we'll explain a little bit later. So an initial exploration of the diminishing role of facts and analysis in American public life. So that's what we'll be talking about, is this over-reliance on opinion and a kind of a disregard for facts. And so the question that we'll be asking will be very provocative today, and asking a lot of questions and hopefully supplying few answers, but maybe one or two, and getting some good discussion and getting some good thinking around this topic today. So our main question is, do public participation professionals have an obligation to help stakeholders find the truth, or are we only obligated to capture their truth?
And so my observation has been some of us nudge the participants towards the sponsored preferred facts. Some do the reverse. We're nudging the sponsors to accept the participants' facts, and some of us facilitate towards a shared understanding, which may or may not be based on the facts. So one question is, to what extent, if any, do facts really matter in these very important public participation processes? And so we will go about this in a four-step mechanism.
Yeah, so we'll talk about Rand's thesis. We'll grapple with our duty of care by looking at IAP2 standards, examine our own obligations to the truth, both in our presentation and hopefully internally you'll be examining your obligations as well and thinking about that, and go through a few tools that we think might help prevent truth decay. So we wanted to start off with just a quick provocative question just to see where you might be at this point. So when there's a disagreement on truth, whose truth is more important in a public process? And I think Drew has a poll question for you guys.
He sure does. He sure does, Devin. And it's just gone up on the screen now. So we're going to encourage all of our participants on the line to respond to that question. When there's a disagreement on truth, whose truth is more important in a public process? Participating publics, wider populations, sponsors, processes, or hey, how about that facilitator? So just give you a couple of seconds to respond. Okay, hopefully everyone's done that. Drew, let's close it down and let's see what the responses are. So, Sam and Devin, so participating publics, 19% said that theirs is the most important. 42% said the wider population. 4% said the sponsors, 31% said process, and 4% said facilitator. So interesting results. Back to you.
That is interesting. Thank you, Amelia.
So let's just sit with this for a brief session. So whose truth is more important to the process? The facilitators. Sit with that a minute, and when we get into the IAP2 standards and see whether or not that is consistent with our standards, and if so, great, and if not, maybe we change our standards, maybe we don't. But look at the wider population's concerns is most important, and isn't that true? I mean, that's what we're trying to get at, is not just the people that are coming to the open houses or to the meetings, but what does everyone else whose lives may be impacted by this public decision going to think? So let's explore this as we go on and talk about the evolution of public participation from my perspective, is that in the beginning, and in the 70s and 80s, it was more of a tell perspective. We were involving the public by telling them what the sponsors wanted to know. And then there was a shift to ask and tell, or tell and ask, in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, especially in the States, this concept of collaborative problem solving, recommendation making, stakeholder advisory committees tended to be in vogue. And then in 2010s, moving towards competitive governance or pretend public participation. We love that article that was around about pretend public participation. So, you know, is this real? Is it imagined? Or am I just getting more cynical in my older age? But then in 2017, certain national events happened, and we have the new era of truth decay, the decay of truth in societal dialogue. And certainly at our national level, we're seeing that, but it also comes down to the state and regional and local levels as well. And truth has a long history, he said with a wry smile, and the little cartoon says, not truth, formerly truth. You know, seemingly something that was clear now has a sense of ambiguity to it. But the issue isn't new. Back in the day, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, he was a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, a U.S. senator from New York. He talked about the leakage of reality from America Life. And everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. Of course, nowadays, he would say hers or his and hers or their facts. And so from the 50s and 60s, we've been struggling with this. The Vietnam War was a provocation for this internal dialogue. Well, what are today's frames or today's verbiage? Well, we know alternative facts. We hear about fake news. We hear people saying what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening, and that truth isn't truth. Well, maybe Moynihan predicted this back in the day when he noted that the way standards and expectations, as they fall over time, it seems that we accept each new lower level as somehow normal. And he called this defining deviancy down, that we accept lower standards of integrity and civil discourse. And, you know, is that good? Is that neutral? Is that bad? Well, Rand took a shot at looking at this from a think tank academic perspective, and Devin's going to walk us through some of their findings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we thought it would be really useful to share Rand's model here to talk about the 4 trends that they identified as truth decay. So truth decay is really a cluster of 4 of these trends, and it has several drivers that drive that trend of increasing disagreement about facts and data. That's the first trend. Second, a blurring of the line between opinion and fact. The increasing relative volume and resulting influence of opinion over fact. And declining trust in formally respected sources of factual information. So these are what they call truth decay. And so the consequences of that are erosion of civil discourse, political paralysis, alienation and disengagement, and uncertainty, and kind of this inability to get things done, and political paralysis, right? I think we see that. And so I thought it was really interesting in this model that they talked about the drivers of that. And so cognitive processes and cognitive biases, right? So as humans, we have these biases that are things like confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance, and that we don't want to accept things that go against what we already believe. And so I think at a very individual level, this can happen on up to the media, academia and research organizations, political actors in the government, foreign actors. And this is in an American context that they were talking about this. But I think, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is probably can translate pretty well across governments these days. So we have another poll question. Just we want to know, do you see this when in your public policy facilitation? How are you actually seeing any of these drivers? And if so, which one?
Thank you. Sorry, thank you very much, Devin. So which of the consequences of truth decay have you seen most often in your facilitation work, in your P2 work? Erosion of civil discourse, political paralysis, alienation and disengagement, uncertainty, or if you have something other, just please pop it in the question box and I'll be happy to share it with Sam and Devin. All right, just a couple more seconds, Drew, to get people to respond to this. All right. So let's see the responses. So the responses are erosion of civil discourse at 25%, political paralysis at 13%, alienation and disengagement 47%, uncertainty was 16%, and no one's responded in the question box. So everyone felt that the four captured the concerns. So
Great.
back to both of you.
Yeah, so it sounds like Rand probably nailed the consequences then, if everyone seemed to choose those options. And so, yeah, this alienation and disengagement. So we probably really need to focus on that if a lot of our work is in public outreach. So we need to think about do these consequences, these drivers, affect the public and how they even want to participate with us. And so just some data from the United States shows this erosion of trust in the government. So you can see this top graph here talks about several different institutions. On the right-hand side of this graph, you can see the scientific community, medicine, banks and financial institutions, television, which is an interesting institution, the press, and Congress. And it is just dropping off, especially 2008 with banks and financial institutions. That's a really big one. But Congress has just steadily been on the decline. And this goes from 1975 to 2012 as the most recent data in this particular poll.
You know what's interesting here, Devin, is the scientific community. Started high, went down, sure, now kind of a little bit of trending up there in 2012. The question, it would be interesting to find out what NSF says about where it is today.
Yeah, I agree. And as a scientist, I'm like, yay. So I hope that, and I think that's a good question of like, where do facts come from? What are we talking about when we talk about facts, which we'll come up to in a moment. But I think this is really interesting just to show this is really happening. Trust is declining. This other graph here, most have little or no confidence in the political wisdom of the American people, so they don't trust American people to make political decisions. And so as practitioners, we're working in this intersection between the public and government often. And how do we make sense of this? How do we grapple with this decline? What is our role? And so that's what we're going to continue to talk about. And Sam's going to go through the next little part here about what we mean.
And so as a predicate to that, with 47% of us thinking that alienation and disengagement is problematic, and if people have little or no confidence in each other, we find that our work is in the intersection of logic and emotion. There's traffic on the logical street, and there's traffic on the emotional street. So I see in part our job is helping participants navigate through that intersection of logic and emotion. And in having this conversation in Victoria, it was interesting the difference in terms people were using to describe this phenomena. And so we went to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, a commonly used dictionary here in town, and actually just looked at their definitions, and not to force one definition over the other, but just to have a common lexicon for the following conversation. They define facts as something that has actual existence and objective reality. Seems pretty straightforward. Then truths, the body of real things, events, facts, the state of being, the case. And then contrast those two terms to beliefs, a state of mind in which confidence is placed in some person or thing, considered to be true or held as an opinion. So beliefs and opinions somewhat used as synonyms there, but the definition is in which confidence is placed. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true or not. This all then leads to differences in levels of trust, which is the assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of something. So just, this is the rhetorical question here. Think about these definitions and what they mean in our practice. Do we focus on facts? Do we focus on beliefs? When someone's belief is inconsistent with another's belief or inconsistent with what the other believes as a fact, what do we do with that? What is our obligation in that regard, if any? Do we use these words consistently across our profession? Do the participants, the sponsors, use these words? We found in the dialogue in Victoria, they were somewhat flexible, and the terms, similar terms meant absolutely different things to people. So people believe that beliefs, excuse the redundancy, were in fact facts. So to what extent, if any, are we as P2 professionals complicit in this process? Well, let's look to our code of ethics. First one we talk about is purpose. We support participation as a process to make better decisions that incorporate the interests and concerns of all affected stakeholders and meet the needs of the decision-making body. Let's parse that for a moment. Make better decisions. Well, do you make better decisions with facts, feelings, or is this the intersection of facts and feelings that guide us? And how do we help people through those when they are not, on the surface at least, compatible? And notice the focus on the needs of the decision-making body. We talked earlier in our poll as to who should be, what we should, when there's disagreement, whose truth is more important. Well, only 4% said the sponsors. Well, the decision makers are frequently the sponsors, at least here in the States. So what do we think about that? We talked about the role of the practitioner. Says we will enhance the process by assisting the decision makers in being responsive to the public's concerns or suggestions. So first of all, on the surface, this document seems to say the decision makers are different than the public. That's often a matter of political reality. But we're assisting the decision makers in being responsive to their concerns and suggestions. The word fact doesn't appear anywhere so far in our standards. And then for advocacy, we'll advocate for the public process, will not advocate for the interest, party, or project outcome. But we need to meet the needs of the decision-making body and assist them in being responsive. What do we do when the sponsor's truth is inconsistent with a participant belief or vice versa? That's the question. So we have another little poll.
Thanks very much, Sam. So we've got that going up on the screen now, Drew, with the poll question. So based on our standards, which of the following is most important for IAP2 practitioners to focus on? Facts, truths, beliefs, opinion? A tricky question. So think about it for just a couple of seconds, and then please let us know your response. And while people are responding to that, We had a question from Peter Sam and Sam, who's asking, is this distinction between fact and opinion, where do values live? Opinions are presumably right or wrong, even if we disagree on which. But right and wrong don't apply to values. So just something for you to think about while we're hearing from the others. And we've got the response back now. So our participants have said that facts are 37%, truths are 33%, beliefs are 17%, and opinion is 13%. Thank you to everyone who responded.
And thank you. And that's so interesting because at IAP2 in Victoria, the overwhelming majority of people in attendance said beliefs. And Devin and I were just over the weekend at the Oregon Mediation Association annual conference. And we did this for mediators who in the States don't necessarily identify themselves as P2 professionals and vice versa. And there, amongst mediators, C, beliefs, was about 85% of the response. So this is an interesting distinction, and I just, because we don't have great interactive abilities here, given the limitations of the medium we're using, it is something to sit with and discuss what do these mean, and perhaps at the beginning of these processes that we join in and help with, we should engage the participants in a conversation as to what these terms mean to them, what are their importance, and absolutely bring in the value-based distinctions. So whether or not a fact is good or bad may be objectively verifiable by a third-party independent source, but whether or not that is good, neutral, or bad can be largely based on the values, which are unique to us and make our job so much more challenging and, frankly, so much more rewarding. So independently of our various views, beliefs, opinions, facts, or truths, let's look at some tools that we could choose to navigate through this intersection of logic and emotion.
Right. So this reference dates us and puts us in a place and time. So for those of you that know Tim the Toolman Taylor might get that. But so whatever we determine our role is, we think these are some tools that Sam and I came up with, looking at other tools and other literature too, that might help us ground our processes in facts, should we decide that's important, right? So we need to help the parties decide, like Sam just mentioned. So how do they want to evaluate the truth? I think it's helpful then to look at how we as humans process facts. And so a couple of psychologists said that there are 5 key criteria that parties use to evaluate the truth. Those criteria are general acceptance by others, the amount of supporting evidence, compatibility with their beliefs, which I think is an interesting point, and to the question about values. I think that values kind of underlie these beliefs. If I had to stick values in here somewhere, it would be the basis for beliefs. General coherence of the statement, credibility of the source of information. So those are the criteria that people look at to figure out, is this true or is this not true? You need fluent processing, meaning that it's easy to wrap your brain around. You know, we can believe that relativity is true all we want, but if we don't really wrap our brain around it, we're not getting it, right? And people want to give their mind an easy excuse. We are very good at being very efficient with our thinking, which means cognitive shortcuts all the time. And also, we need to understand ourselves as a coherent and cogent human being. So I'm not that different yesterday as I am today, right? I'm the same person. I still have the same values. I still have the same beliefs. So it's useful to help people understand that, you know, your beliefs are not you. A prior decision or belief was right, given what was known then, but now the underlying facts have changed, and so should my mind. Right, so it might be easier for the parties to dispute the facts than it is to alter their deepest held beliefs. Like I said a minute ago, that's because of cognitive dissonance and needing to be kind of a coherent self. So sometimes the mind doesn't follow the facts. As John Adams puts it, facts are stubborn things, but our minds are even more stubborn. So again, this way out with dignity, allowing people to change their previously held beliefs and allowing them to say, okay, well, that was based on disinformation, and now I have new information, rather than saying, you know, people who think that are X or Y. I think framing it in that way allows people to have what we call a way out with dignity.
And doing joint fact-finding also is a very positive way to allow people to go forward and look at things they're more likely to believe because they believed in the people, the process that was used to go forward.
Right, and so yeah, now we're getting into these tools and ways we might help people with understanding facts in a process. And so note that we're using the word facts. I think Rand really, when they were talking about their truth decay, they were really talking about facts, because it's not only it's an elevation of opinion above fact was what Rand was really talking about. And I understand that we're kind of delving into, especially once we go from public participation to public opinion to mediation, as Sam talked about, our truths are also important. But I think a couple of these help us with our processes. So one, we can really help parties understand how they determine facts. So we can normalize cognitive biases, like I was mentioning. We can say, look, you know, as humans, we do have confirmation bias. We are experiencing reactive devaluation, which means that we don't like what the other group says just because they say it, not because it's a bad idea, just because of what group it came from. That's a common human tendency. And so by talking about this and normalizing, that's how we think, this is what happens, and that's okay, but we need to get beyond that. We can help them be more open to the facts of others. We can help parties understand what the facts are. So one thing that we can do is we can have a discussion at the outset of the process that creates an agreed upon basis for strong and reliable information. So what does the group say? What does the group want to believe? Is it a journal article that's been peer reviewed? Is that what the group thinks is strong and reliable? Is it 5 journal articles on this side versus only 1 on this side, therefore one is better than the other? So we can engage in that joint fact-finding process that Sam was talking about earlier, once we have that basis that they've agreed upon.
And so the last bullet here is, I think, a theme that we tend to use, and fortunately it's been more successful than not, is say to them, we're here today to explore these issues and options. We're not here to debate them. And create this sense of understanding that, you know, there's no truths about the future. And oftentimes people debate as though there are truths about the future. And I think our processes, if the general flavor of them is more exploratory, we increase the chances of success. And one way we can help them determine is look at external reference points of fairness. So talk about values like justice, equity, fairness, law, the cultural norms in the communities. Of course, there are others that are going to be unique to the dynamic that we are hired to help the parties navigate through. You know, is the focus on where they do agree, or can we get to a truth they can live with? And What does that mean in the absolutist sense of the truth that's objectively verifiable versus one that they can accept? And we like to normalize the idea that each may have their own truth. But the question is, it's okay that they each see things differently if the issue is their truth. But what if it's not their truth? What if at the end of the day, the decision maker, the sponsor, is going to be making a fact-based decision? But then, of course, the reality is, do they ever make fact-based decisions, especially when they are elected? And one concept that we talk about is that, if it's okay for you to have your truth, perhaps it's okay for them to have their truth. And how do you frame that up at a practical level? Well, this technique is called the umbrella question, and it's designed to accommodate multiple truths. So it really is a fill-in-the-blank sentence. How can we address the interests of Group A? Same time, put in the interest of B, and then focus on by satisfying the common interest. And here's an example from an actual public process that we handled. It was about an island that was going to be used or proposed to be used for economic development in a new port in the city of Portland. And basically it was, we want more business. We want more business. And the other side was saying, no more business, no more business. We want the environment. We want the environment. We want social equity. And we engaged them in a process that allowed them to look at accommodating multiple truths with the example, how can we achieve economic viability, a net increase in environmental function and social equity, while at the same time being good stewards of the island's unique assets, thereby collaboratively creating a shared vision of her sustainable community. Everyone said, yes, that's the issue. And that allowed us to explore the problem versus the prior debate of one trumped the other. So the umbrella question we use at the beginning to set the tone, or at process impasse where the public is getting ready to make a recommendation or give their input. Well, how do we set up the facts after that and the perceptions after that? We're big believers in the use of decision tables. In this particular example, it was whether or not to change the use of the TTD airport, which is the FAA guidelines for the Troutdale Airport. And the options were maximum commercial use, which meant bulldozing the airport and making it an industrial warehouse site, to option 4, maximum aviation, and the options in between. We gave them this 8-step process where they identified options, they weighed the evaluation criteria, which were economic, environmental, social, and legal, gathered actual data for each of the options for each of those evaluation criteria. They voted on these and their acceptability, and they assessed the risk, managed the uncertainty, and by using consensus polling, everyone then weighted these two things. So on the face of this document, option 2, more commercial, industrial, less business aviation, was the winner, but 1 and 3 were close behind. What this often does is eliminate one as opposed to promote the best one. Here, maximum aviation went to the wayside. So everyone gets an equal voice, and there's some programming and tools there on that website you can call your attention to. And then when it comes time to manage uncertainty, using modeling to predict what facts about the future are more likely to be the case. So here's another airport. This is our main airport in the city of Portland. The issue was how many takeoffs and landings were going to happen in the year 2035. The answer to that then would determine logically whether or not we have a new third runway. Do we have a decentralized terminal as opposed to the individual terminal forward? We brought in joint experts. The advisory committee worked on coming up with the underlying assumptions, and they did a Monte Carlo analysis, which is where you take all of your public participation members at the table, you fly them on a plane to Monte Carlo, and you put all your money on red or green, and whoever gets the right, no, that's not what it is. It is an analysis where they take all of the variable assumptions, run them millions of times in analysis, and here the median, or it's a 50% likelihood that there'd be 13.4 million annual passengers, and the planning went consistent with that. And if it deviated over the course of time and became higher, we'd start planning for the third runway and decentralized terminal, or if it went lower, based on annual evaluations, we would go forward. And the reality of what happened is what's been tracking since we did this in 2005 is that this analysis has tracked quite well. So we're staying on this course. And that then brought people together because the pro-business interests were focusing on this number, the environmental community interests were focusing on this number, but each had an opportunity of only 10%, that it would be 8.4, and only 10%, that it would be 21.3. So it made logical sense to bring people together. And this is the concept of disrupting polarized discourse. So at the end of the day, truth decay has real consequences. Our former Secretary of State under Trump, Rex Tillerson, said, if our leaders seek to conceal the truth, or as we as people become accepting of alternatives realities that are no longer grounded in fact, then we as citizens are on a pathway to relinquishing our freedom. And our Republican senator recently died, a major opponent of Trump, despite being part of the same party, said increasingly we have our own facts to reinforce our convictions, and any empirical evidence that disputes them is branded as fake. And the challenges that are associated with that, I think, are pretty apparent from our processes.
Yeah, so that was a lot of tools pretty quickly. So hopefully your heads are still on straight, because this is really a participation. We want to have more participation in this webinar, though we know that's difficult, but we do really want to know, what do you do to prevent truth decay, if anything? What do you do to increase trust in your process while not advocating for an interest party or outcome? And maybe just personally, what's your commitment to moving forward? What has this session made you think about? And so those are the things that maybe we have a little bit of time, and Amelia and will let us know how much time we have, but that's, you can share your comments in the question box if you have any.
Thanks, Sam and Devin. So we're looking for some of your responses. So please pop them into the question box so that we can share them with Sam and Devin. This is truly a challenge, and it's a challenge in Canada and Australasia as well as the United States. What is truth? What is fact? What do we bring into our processes? How do we bring these things into our processes? You are all experts out there, so we're looking forward to you to sharing those. So we've got one from Angie. We work to help people at least feel heard. So we want to make sure that people are heard as we're moving forward into the processes that we're doing.
And think about how important it is that when we notice that alienation and disagreement, 47% of us thought that that was a major ramification and downside of truth decay. And so being heard is essential to help dissipate that alienation and help promote engagement.
Yeah, and just shows the importance of my truth, right? If I'm a participating member of the public, my truth is important, and it's important for us to be able to hear that as practitioners and provide a forum for that.
Terrific. So from Edwina, ask, listen, and learn. Ask a lot of questions. Capture the questions. Listen to listen and not answer. Learn from the dialogue without an agenda.
And those are words to live by. And the challenges I've observed is that the sponsors are the ones that perhaps are not as open to asking lots of questions and to listen, to learn. But it's a promotion of a point of view. It's an effort to convince the public that the sponsor's preordained solutions of the problem is the best one. And when they don't listen to learn, it just speaks to the alienation and disengagement that I think dilutes the quality of our work.
Mm-hmm. So from Camden, stating clearly in brackets that that is not true when it is not. So actually calling people out if it's not a correct fact.
Yeah, I think that's an important one. And I think I've spoken with facilitators who said that that's been a challenge for them, but that also that made a really important moment in the process when they have done something like that. To call out, a facilitator shared with us once that they called out a stakeholder was looking at two different reports, but they were really focusing on one report and not really appreciating the truth of the other report. And so they pointed out in the process, just so you know, you are focusing on this thing here and not focusing on this other second report. And so they called them out on what they were doing, and I think that was helpful.
And my sense of this is it's a delicate dance, and I like to frame it up. So party A speaks their truth. We as the facilitator, P2 professional mediator, whatever role du jour we are playing, we know that other people in the room don't share that same perspective. I like to set it up by saying, thank you for X. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to explore a different perspective or view or belief? They speak, and then I will say, well, how do we hold both these truths? How do we balance both these truths? How do we explore them? So I think that it's a way of engaging the participants and not having us be the major focus and judge and jury of someone else's truth, but we're there to help manage the exploration. We're not the judge and jury. So it's a delicate balance, and there are times when it absolutely needs to be the case. Another example might be, you just said X. Well, what are your thoughts about this other report from party C here who says quite the contrary? Help us reconcile that. So it's always, again, getting back to a comment a few questions ago, is questions, questions, questions. Mm-hmm. Listen, listen, listen.
And I think if you really establish that basis for strong and reliable information, I'm using, you can't see me, but I'm using air quotes, that allows you then to check someone and say, where did you get that information? Does that fit the criteria for what the group has decided is strong and reliable information? So I think helping prevent some of that, if you can, by establishing what the group thinks is true, what they're going to use as fact, can be really helpful in allowing you to then call out somebody when they need it too.
One of Devin's favorite expressions when the PhD in her and the lawyer in me are having full and frank explorations of our underlying views, which can be from time to time different. I will make a statement, and she looks at me in a very open-minded facial expression and tone and will say, Sam, tell me more about that, as opposed to saying, you're wrong, you're a dotard, when was your last clear thought? And it just kind of invites an exploration of it versus putting me on the spot. And I think that's a lesson learned. I have now made part of my facilitation repertoire well, tell me more, tell us more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it's easier to let people understand, to help them come around to realize their own inconsistencies is a lot easier than saying, you're a hypocrite, or something really outlandish like that.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't go down well. So
Yeah.
we've got quite a lot of other comments that I'm going to share with you, and then I actually have some questions. So I'm going to share the comments from people first, and then I'll come back to the questions if that's okay, Sam and Devin.
Perfect.
Okay, so apparently we've got a group in the city of Edmonton, and they're watching you as a group today, and they've talked about, we proactively disclose information and input that is counter to our decisions and tell the story about how it did or didn't impact decisions. Closing the loop is critical, and we often miss that step. So just recognizing what they bring into the room, but also the importance of coming back and closing the loop. So that's from the city of Edmonton. So moving on just quickly to Kat. And Kat said, we have implemented a number of initiatives focusing on transparency and finding opportunities for the public to have personal contact with local decision makers. The purpose of this is to rebuild trust and for citizens to be heard. Not a surprise, the importance of relationships and starting to build that trust back up. Thank you, Kat. From Stephen, as a trained mediator, I also use the explorer metaphor by asking if all participants will admit the possibility that there might be some information that they are not yet aware of, because if not, they would say they already know everything. So again, getting people to share their thoughts and ideas. For Miles, are there other words we can use to avoid the battle over, in brackets, truth? I often use what is important for you. So instead of using the word truth, what is important for you? From Ryan, one thing I use with my wife. I feel like you need to join me over here in reality in order for us to continue this conversation. Very brave, Ryan.
Whoa! Hello!
So from Graham, maximize transparency between the public and the consultant or the client throughout the process. Acknowledge that there are differences between facts, beliefs during an engagement event. So those are just some comments. I'm going to come back to the questions in a minute, but just your thoughts on those comments from people.
Well, what I like the theme of closing the loop from Edmonton, Kat's transparency, Stephen's metaphor of exploring in Miles is what's important to you. This is how we use this chart here using the decision table. It transparently shows why there was a strong preference for option 2, more commercial industrial and less business aviation, because it scored the highest from an economical perspective, environmental perspective, and a social perspective. It didn't score well from a legal perspective, but despite that, it was the winning proposal. If we don't set it up in the decision table and be transparent about the advantages and disadvantages and supply the underlying facts for each of these evaluation criteria, economic, environmental, social, and legal, it becomes a debate. And because the participants using this mastering decisions tool are allowed to weight how important this is, is the economy more important than the environment, than the social, than the legal, it shows us how the values and differences can impact the results. So if the will of the decision-making body was that the legal ramifications were the most important, that would have won this analysis because it had the highest scoring, the lowest scoring result. It would have lost the analysis from that perspective. But for maximum aviation would have won it because if that was the only criteria, it did so darn well there. It would have trumped the otherwise winner, number 2.
Okay, thank you. So now to the questions. From Marka, to what extent do you feel we need to provide training for our clients about new approaches to reduce truth decay? And Marka, with your permission, I want to add something. It's not just to our clients, but how do we build capacity within the participants? How do we encourage them to embrace facts and beliefs and other things. I think, what is the role of training in all of this? Devin and Sam.
I think it's indispensable. I mean, we start every one of these processes by having a training we call Collaboration 101. So the first event, the kickoff event, in addition to talking about the scope, what's in it, what's not in it, what are the various steps, what are the modalities for participation that are going forward, we talk about what does collaboration really mean? What does being transparent really mean? What does an exploration really mean? And we talk about these definitions of truth, beliefs, opinions, values, and needs to ground them, if nothing else, in a common vocabulary to minimize the flyby where beliefs are considered truths and truths aren't always considered to be believable. And so I think it's important on the ground, and that's where we spend most of our time with the participants. But understand, our practice is not pure P2 practice. We tend to be hired to work with the 30-person advisory committee that runs the spectrum of interests and perspectives. And there is a separate P2 professional that's going out to the larger public and garnering their views. And we do it as a team.
Thank you. So another quick question. Could you comment on the way that a catchphrase like "no more taxes" can overpower facts and data, the truth that might prove the necessity of a project? So just some of these really big phrases that come out every now and again. How do you manage those? How do you bring them into the discussion?
Yeah, I think that is part of the economy of thought that we were talking about earlier. It's an easy idea to attach to. A lot of people aren't spending a ton of time reading about tax code, and those it's hard as just a member of public to understand what's going on. And so I think a lot of politicians, a lot of the media, social media, all of these memes that people are creating really hook in to that ease of thought that we want to rely on. It's very hard to read up on the issues, and it's hard to hold a nuanced view of what needs to happen, particularly as we get into our political party being part of our identity. You know, the more we move into that, I think the more difficult it becomes to hold those nuanced views, where I might think, oh, okay, well, that person on the other side kind of has a good idea. It's what I've talked about with reactive devaluation a little bit. So it's tough.
Well, first of all, I just want to comment that I thought these questions you're going to be asking us were multiple choice or true or false. You're really making us think here, Marka. I'm looking at you right now, Marka. So one of the rules I always suggest in these processes are no slogans, no euphemisms. Mm-hmm. It's just a flat out rule to suggest that those are words of debate. Words of exploration are neutral. They are setting up to define the problem in a way that both sides agree.
And I think the tool that Sam mentioned earlier would be how I would handle that. And I'd look at them and say, tell me more about that.
And let's
get at the basis of their belief.
And let's do an umbrella question.
Yeah. Let's
do an umbrella question to phrase this up, as opposed to no more taxes. We want taxes. Oh, yeah.
It's our, and maybe this comes from our mediator training, but it's our responsibility to dig at that slogan and see what their underlying interest is.
Great. Well, Thank you, and we shouldn't put Marka on the spot, actually, because it was actually Drew that asked the question about taxes. But Marka just wanted.
Oh my goodness, Drew!
Marka wanted to let you know that thanks for having her in, for paying attention to her. So thanks for that. Now, Stephen has just made a suggestion of something that maybe people want to look at. The idea of multiple viewpoints is explained quickly by the story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Now, I don't know that story, but maybe we'll look it up and share it when we send out the materials as well, the 6 blind men and the elephant. Now, just quickly to Sam and Dev, we've got just a few minutes left. So we've answered all of the questions. Everyone's had an opportunity to make a comment. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
Well, really, when it gets dark, we look to the king, Elvis Presley, and try to remember never to forget that the truth is like the sun. You can shut it out from time to time, but it ain't going away. So finally, thank you. Thank you for this exploration. I think this is an important topic. We're so proud to be associated with P2 professionals and doing this so important work. And we know each of you are committed to making the public an integral part of our decision-making processes. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so very much. I'm going to come back to you in just a second for any last comments, because Dev, I know I just cut you off, but I just want to remind everybody on the line that we do have a taster series next week, which is our 45-minute training session, and that's on facilitation agility. Off the rails, but still on track. So actually, that's a nice segue that into some of the work that Sam and Dev have shared with you today. So that's November the 19th at 11 Pacific. So please go to your respective affiliates, whether it's Canada, the United States, or Australasia, to sign up for Facilitation Agility. And our next learning webinar is happening on December 11th. And it's the Digital Engagement Roundtable. We tend to have that every year, and we'll be bringing back the people that participated in the Victoria Conference and learn a little bit more from them about what's going on online through our digital medium, and that's December 11th at 11. So I really want to thank Dev and Sam on behalf of IAP2 Canada, IAP2 USA, and IAP2 Australasia, and all of the participants that we have online today. This is a tricky subject, and I know that we're all kind of stumbling around a little bit, and you've provided us with some really great tips and tools on how to take, pardon my expression, but the bull by the horns and say, we can do this. We have the ability to do this. And actually, I think we need to do this. P2 practitioners, mediators, and others need to stand up and have these really hard and difficult conversations. And so we thank you very much for giving us some ways in which we can do that. And as I promised, Dev, I want to give the last opportunity to you and Sam as before we sign off for the rest of the day.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed this. I hope that you all got something out of it, at least just some ideas to think on. And I want to thank everybody who came, and particularly those who had to wake up really early, or wherever you may be from. So I appreciate your participation.
And I'll say simply, do good, avoid evil, and prevent truth decay.
Excellent.
Thanks.
And with that, thank you very much to everyone online. Thank you very much for joining us. You will be receiving the recording and the PowerPoint and any other collateral materials that Sam and Dev want to share with us within the next 24 to 48 hours. And we'd also encourage you to do the survey. Thanks very much, everyone. Have yourself a fabulous day. Bye-bye now.